The breaking of the covenant. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Assembly hummed with an energy that hadn't been felt in 3 centuries. Representatives from 47 starfaring civilizations gathered in the great amphitheater, their diverse forms creating a tapestry of biological and synthetic evolution. At the center of it all stood Elder Corthax, a being whose species had witnessed the rise and fall of empires across millennia. His 4 eyes, each capable of seeing different spectrums of light, focused on the emergency beacon that had summoned them all. The Zephyrian Empire had done something unthinkable. They had broken the Covenant of Soul, the one rule that had maintained peace in the galaxy for over 500 years. Never provoke the humans. Ambassador Maya Chen sat in the designated human section, her weathered face showing neither surprise nor anger. She had served as humanity's voice to the galaxy for 30 years, and in all that time she had hoped this day would never come. Beside her, her aide, Lieutenant Marcus Torres, shifted nervously. He was young, only 25, and had never witnessed what the older generation called the awakening. Elder Corthax's voice resonated through the chamber, translated instantly into dozens of languages. 3 days ago, the Zephyrian Empire conducted an unprovoked attack on the human agricultural colony of New Eden. 4,732 civilians were killed. Among them were 916 children attending the colony's educational facilities. A ripple of shock passed through the assembly. Even those species who had no concept of childhood as humans understood it, recognized the significance. The humans had made it clear from their first contact with the galactic community that their young were sacred, protected above all else. Supreme Commander Zeloth of the Zephyrian Empire stood proudly in his designated area, his scales shimmering with colors that indicated confidence and superiority. His species had evolved from apex predators on a death world, and they had never truly understood why the galaxy feared these soft, bipedal mammals from an unremarkable planet in an average star system. The Zephyrians claimed the colony was encroaching on their territorial expansion rights, Elder Corthax continued, his voice heavy with the weight of what was to come. They state that the humans were given adequate warning to evacuate. Ambassador Chen stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried no emotion, which those who knew humans recognized as the most dangerous sign of all. May I address the assembly, Elder Corthax? The floor recognizes Ambassador Chen of the Terran Republic. Chen walked to the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. She pulled up a holographic display showing the New Eden colony, as it had been just a week ago. Green fields stretched to the horizon, children played in parks, and families went about their daily lives in peace. New Eden was established 53 years ago on an uninhabited planet in neutral space. Every protocol was followed. Every treaty was honored. The colonists were farmers, teachers, scientists, and their families. They possessed no military installations, no weapons beyond those needed for agricultural purposes. She paused, letting the images cycle through scenes of daily life. The Zephyrian warning came exactly 17 minutes before their attack. Not enough time to evacuate a city, let alone children from their schools. Supreme Commander Zeloth's scales shifted to patterns of dismissal. The weak deserve whatever fate befalls them. Your species spread across the galaxy like a plague, claiming resources and space. You hide behind your treaties and your words, but you are nothing more than prey animals who have forgotten your place in the natural order. The chamber fell so silent that even the air recyclers seemed to pause. Every non-human representative turned to look at Ambassador Chen, waiting for the response they all knew was coming. Chen smiled, and it was perhaps the most terrifying expression any of them had ever seen on a human face. It wasn't cruel or angry. It was the smile of someone who had just been given permission to stop pretending. Supreme Commander Zeloth, I am required by Terran law to offer you one opportunity. Surrender unconditionally. Return the bodies of our dead for proper burial. Submit your entire military command structure for trial. Accept the judgment of the Galactic Assembly for your crimes. She paused, her dark eyes never leaving the Zephyrian leader. You have 1 hour to respond. Zeloth's laughter filled the chamber, a sound like grinding metal. You threaten us? The Zephyrian Empire spans 17 systems. We command a fleet of 10,000 warships. Your scattered colonies and trade vessels are nothing before our might. Ambassador Chen nodded once as if she had expected this response. Lieutenant Torres, please send the following message to Terra Command. Authorization code Omega-77. The garden requires tending. The young lieutenant's face went pale, but his fingers moved across his communication device without hesitation. Message sent, Ambassador. Elder Korthax's 4 eyes widened in recognition of the phrase. He had been present the last time those words were spoken. Nearly 3 centuries ago, the Vraxian hegemony had made a similar mistake. The Vraxian hegemony no longer existed. The assembly will recess for 1 hour, Elder Korthax announced, his voice carrying an urgency that made even the most aggressive species take notice. I strongly suggest all representatives use this time to review their historical archives regarding previous human military engagements. As the representatives filed out, many rushing to their communication stations, Ambassador Chen remained in the center of the chamber. Supreme Commander Zaloth approached her, his 2-meter height towering over her small frame. You think your words frighten me, human? We have studied your history. Your wars among yourselves, your primitive weapons, your emotional weakness. You are nothing but clever animals who learn to use tools. Chen looked up at him with an expression of profound sadness. You studied our history, but you learned the wrong lesson. You saw our wars and thought we were violent. You saw our emotions and thought we were weak. You saw our tools and thought they were primitive. She turned to walk away, then paused. Supreme Commander, we don't use those tools on each other anymore because we learned they were too effective. We put them away, locked them behind treaties and promises, and chose to be gardeners instead of warriors. And now? Zaloth asked, his scales betraying the first hint of uncertainty. Now you've killed our children, Chen said simply, and the gardeners are going to remove the weeds. The hour passed quickly. When the assembly reconvened, several seats were empty. The representatives who had reviewed their archives had quietly begun evacuating their people from any system within 50 light-years of Zephyrian space. They remembered what happened to those who were too close to a human gardening operation. Supreme Commander Zaloth stood proudly as the hour expired. The Zephyrian Empire rejects your pathetic demands. If you want war, we will give you war. Our fleets are already mobilizing. Your colonies will burn as New Eden burned. Ambassador Chen simply nodded. So be it. The Terran Republic formally declares the implementation of Protocol 7. All non-combatant species are advised to maintain a minimum distance of 70 light-years from Zephyrian space for the next standard galactic rotation. What is Protocol 7? Asked a young representative from the Altarian Federation, one of the newer species to achieve faster-than-light travel. Elder Korthax answered, his voice heavy with memory. Complete ecological restoration. The humans will remove every trace of the Zephyrian Empire from existence and return their worlds to their natural, pre-sapient state. The young representative's feathers ruffled in confusion. But that would take massive fleets, decades of war, billions of soldiers. No, Elder Korthax corrected. It will take approximately 14 standard days. You see, the humans long ago stopped thinking of war in terms of victory and defeat. They approach it as they approach any other problem that threatens their survival. They solve it completely, efficiently, and permanently. On Terra, in bunkers that hadn't been opened in centuries, lights began to flicker on. Men and women who had lived their entire lives as teachers, artists, farmers, and engineers received messages on devices they had hoped would never activate. Across human space, the transformation began. Dr. Sarah Kim had spent the last 20 years developing new strains of wheat that could grow in low-light conditions. She received her activation notice while reviewing genetic sequences in her lab. Without hesitation, she walked to a wall panel that hadn't been opened since the day she started her career. Behind it was a uniform and a different set of credentials. She was also Captain Kim, Strategic Weapons Division, specializing in biological system elimination. Construction worker James Murphy was installing solar panels on a new residential complex when his notification arrived. He climbed down from the roof, said goodbye to his coworkers, and went home to retrieve the case he kept in his basement. Inside were the command codes for a ship that had been maintained in perfect condition for 300 years, waiting for the day it might be needed again. Across 1,000 worlds, 3 billion humans underwent the same transformation. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity shed its mask of peaceful cooperation to reveal what lay beneath. They weren't warriors in the traditional sense. They were something far more terrifying. They were problem solvers who had identified a problem that threatened their species' survival. The garden must be tended. The first sign of humanity's response came not as an invasion fleet or a dramatic battle, but as a simple message broadcast on all Zephyrian military channels. You have chosen extinction. We apologize to your offspring who will never exist. This could have been avoided. Fleet Admiral Thax of the Zephyrian Empire's Third Armada laughed when he received the message. His fleet of 800 warships was stationed at Zephyr Prime's main military installation, a fortress world that had never fallen in the Empire's 1,000-year history. Let them come, he told his bridge crew. We will feast on their bones. 3 hours later, his laughter died as his sensors detected something impossible. 12 human vessels had appeared at the edge of the system. Not 1,200, not 12,000, 12 against his 800, Admiral, his sensor officer reported, confusion evident in his voice patterns. The human vessels aren't military configurations. They appear to be mining ships. Before Thax could respond, the 12 vessels did something that defied every law of physics the Zephyrians understood. They synchronized their mining lasers, not to attack the fleet but to target the system's star. The beam frequencies were precisely calibrated, causing a resonance cascade in the star's chromosphere. The star didn't explode. That would have been merciful. Instead, it began to pulse with increasing intensity, each wave of stellar radiation specifically tuned to break down the complex proteins that Zephyrian physiology required for survival. It was elegant, precise, and utterly horrifying in its implications. They're not trying to defeat us, Thax whispered as understanding dawned. They're sterilizing us. By the time he ordered his fleet to attack the mining vessels, it was too late. The cascade was self-sustaining. Within 6 hours, every Zephyrian in the system would be dead at the cellular level, their bodies breaking down into component elements. The infrastructure would remain. The ships would drift intact, but life itself would simply cease. Elder Korthax watched from the Galactic Assembly as reports flooded in from across Zephyrian space. Each human response was different, tailored specifically to the system it targeted. Some worlds saw their atmospheres transformed into compounds toxic only to Zephyrian biology. Others witnessed their gravity fields manipulated to make the planets uninhabitable for exactly one species, while leaving all others unharmed. The Patari, Federation's representative, spoke what many were thinking. This is genocide. It's monstrous. Ambassador Chen, still present in the assembly, responded without emotion. No. Genocide is the murder of innocents based on their race or species. The Zephyrians chose this path when they murdered our children. We are not committing genocide. We are conducting pest control. You're erasing an entire species, the Patari representative protested. Yes, Chen agreed, just as we would eliminate a virus that threatened our existence. The Zephyrians demonstrated they cannot coexist peacefully with other species. They view all others as prey. Such a philosophy is incompatible with galactic civilization. We are solving that incompatibility. On Zephyr Prime, Supreme Commander Zeloth stood in his war room, watching as his empire died around him. 23 of his 37 worlds had gone silent. Not conquered, not occupied, simply silent. The humans weren't sending invasion forces or occupation troops. They were methodically ensuring that no Zephyrian would ever exist again. His chief scientist, a brilliant mind who had developed countless weapons of war, approached with findings that made Zeloth's scales turn white with fear. Supreme Commander, the humans aren't just killing us. They're erasing our entire evolutionary line. The weapons they're using target our specific genetic markers going back millions of years. They're ensuring we can never evolve again, not even from primitive predecessors. Zeloth tried to contact the human forces, to negotiate, to surrender, to beg, but there was no one to contact. The human ships operated autonomously, following predetermined patterns with no need for communication or coordination. They were not soldiers following orders. They were antibodies eliminating an infection. Captain Sarah Kim, formerly Dr. Kim, stood on the bridge of the Harvest Moon, one of the 12 mining vessels that were systematically rendering Zephyrian systems uninhabitable. Her crew of 37 were all dual-purpose citizens like her, scientists and engineers who had hoped never to use their other training. Captain, her weapons officer, formerly a kindergarten teacher named Michael, reported, "The biological agent has achieved 97% saturation on Zephyr 7. Indigenous non-sapient life remains unaffected." "Confirmed," Sarah responded. "Proceed to the next system." Michael hesitated. Captain, there were 3 billion Zephyrians on that world. Sarah turned to look at him, her expression neither cruel nor satisfied, simply resolved. And there were 916 children on New Eden, Michael. They were 5 years old on average. They were learning to read, to paint, to dream of what they might become. She paused. The Zephyrians made their choice. We're simply implementing the consequence. The galaxy watched in horrified fascination as humanity demonstrated why they had been so insistent on peace. It wasn't because they were weak or afraid of war. It was because they had evolved past the concept of proportional response. When truly threatened, humans didn't fight to win. They solved the problem permanently. Within 10 days, only 3 Zephyrian worlds remained active. Supreme Commander Zeloth had recalled all surviving forces to make a final stand at their homeworld. Nearly 3,000 warships, the remainder of their once mighty empire, formed defensive positions around Zephyr Prime. The human response was to send a single ship, not a warship, not a bomber, but a diplomatic vessel. Ambassador Chen herself stood on its bridge as it approached the Zephyrian defensive line. Supreme Commander Zeloth, she broadcast, I am here to accept your unconditional surrender. Zeloth appeared on the communication screen, his once proud bearing broken, his scales dull with defeat. Why, he asked. Why give us this chance now when you've already destroyed everything? Because, Chen replied, we are not monsters. We are gardeners. We remove threats to our garden, but we take no pleasure in it. Surrender now and your remaining population will be relocated to a reservation world. You will be monitored, restricted, but alive. Your species will continue, though it will never again threaten another. This is more mercy than you showed our children. And if we refuse? Zeloth asked, though his voice carried no defiance, only exhausted curiosity. Then in approximately 6 hours, Zephyr Prime's sun will undergo a controlled collapse. The system will become a navigation hazard for the next 10,000 years. Your species will exist only in the historical records as an example of why the Covenant should never be broken. Zeloth looked at his advisors, at his warriors, at the last of his species. They had thought themselves apex predators, the ultimate evolution of strength and dominance. They had failed to understand that humans had evolved past the need for such displays. Humans had become something far more dangerous. A species that had mastered its own violent nature so completely that it could unleash it with surgical precision when necessary. We surrender, Zeloth said, his voice barely a whisper. The evacuation and relocation of the surviving Zephyrians took another 4 days. 300 million individuals, all that remained of an empire that had once spanned 17 systems, were relocated to a single world designated Reservation 7. It was a comfortable world, with everything they needed to survive and even thrive, but surrounded by monitoring stations and defensive platforms that would ensure they never left. As the last transport departed Zephyr Prime, humanity's fleet deployed one final device, not a weapon but a memorial. Where the planet had orbited, they placed a beacon that would broadcast for the next 1,000,000 years in every known language. Here stood those who forgot the lesson. They harmed the innocent. They reaped the consequence. Let their absence teach what their presence could not. Never provoke the humans. The Galactic Assembly reconvened one final time to address the crisis. Elder Korthak stood before the gathered representatives, many of whom were still processing what they had witnessed. Let the record show, he intoned formally, that the Zephyrian Empire no longer exists as a galactic power. Let the record also show that humanity has returned to its dormant state, their weapons again sealed, their soldiers returned to their peaceful professions. Ambassador Chen stood to address the assembly one last time. We take no pride in what was necessary. We mourn the loss of life, even that of our enemies. But let every species present understand. We chose to be peaceful not because we are weak, but because we are capable of terrible things when provoked. We prefer to build, to create, to share knowledge and culture with our galactic neighbors. But if you threaten our children, if you mistake our kindness for weakness, you will learn as the Zephyrians learned. She paused, looking at each delegation in turn. The universe is vast and full of wonders. There is room for all of us to grow, to prosper, to achieve greatness together. That is our preference, our hope, our extended hand of friendship. But remember always, we are gardeners and we will tend our garden. The assembly dissolved in contemplative silence. Over the following years, the story of the Zephyrian Empire became required study in every military academy, every diplomatic school, every leadership program across the galaxy. Not as a celebration of human power, but as a warning of what happens when a species evolves past the need for conventional warfare. On Earth, in a small memorial garden, Sarah Kim planted flowers on a monument bearing the names of the 4,732 colonists of New Eden. She had returned to her wheat research, her uniform once again sealed away. Around her, 3 billion other humans had done the same, returning to their lives as teachers, artists, builders, and dreamers. A young girl, perhaps 6 years old, approached her in the garden. "Miss Kim, why are you crying?" Sarah knelt down to the child's level, her eyes still wet with tears. "Because sometimes, little one, we have to do terrible things to prevent even more terrible things from happening." "Will it happen again?" the girl asked with the innocent directness of youth. Sarah looked up at the stars visible in the evening sky. "I hope not. But if it does, we'll be ready. We'll always be ready. That's what it means to be human. We prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." The galaxy continued to turn, civilizations rose and fell, but the lesson remained, carved not in stone or metal, but in the empty spaces where an empire once stood. The humans had returned to their gardens, to their schools, to their farms. They traded, they laughed, they shared their art and music with any who would appreciate it. But every species remembered, every diplomat knew, every warrior understood. The humans were not conquerors. They were not empire builders. They were gardeners, and they had very sharp pruning shears.